Well, the Battle of Bull Run, First Manassas, ended in what turned out to be a rout. Not so much because the Union Army had been beaten badly, but simply because an army of very green troops led by generals who had very low knowledge of combat. Certainly hadn't been in war in 10 years or so. Um, so, you know, things go wrong. Um, the Union Army has fled the battlefield, uh, got intermixed with people who'd come out to do sightseeing, for God's sakes. If you can imagine going to a major battle with picnic lunches, blankets, and sit there and that and watch people being blown apart in front of you, well, okay. Um, Having said that, the spectators and the fleeing U.S. Army got into a huge traffic jam. There was some trouble at a bridge with everybody trying to go over the same narrow bridge at the same time, and the Confederates lobbed shells in as all this confusion, and it turned into a general disaster. The Confederates, though, couldn't follow it up because they were, as the saying goes, they were as disorganized in victory as the Union was in defeat. And then we get this long period, it's July of 1861, and we're not going to get much going happening militarily. Yeah, of course, you get some things until the until 1862, um, and then it's probably only going to be in one place. So, what was happening in this period? Um, well, first off, Bull Run had taught that this was no joke. I mean, first Bull Run, as they say, was the bloodiest battle up to that point in American history. What nobody realized that by 1863 or 1864, this would simply have been seen as a mere skirmish. Casualties about 500 on the Union side, about 400 on deaths, about 500 on the Union side, about 400 on the Southern side. From the point of view of what would happen later on, that's almost nothing. And so, but nevertheless, it was a shock to the nation. It was a shock to both nations. And so they spend the time after Bull Run getting organized. Lincoln brings in George B. McClellan from Ohio. McClellan, as I told you, was a technical expert, and certainly knew all the things you need to know about how to move an army, how to get an army to move, organizing, maneuvering, just the things that everyday soldiers need to know. He made certain that the army was well fed, and in essence, he built a professional army. Union enlistments are now up to 3 years, so that you're not going to run out of troops every 90 days, which was one of Washington's problems at times. And so, if you were in for 3 years, you were in for 3 years. And they did shoot people for deserting. So on the on the northern side, McClellan does an excellent job of turning green soldiers, people who knew nothing about warfare, and of course, the United States did not have the European history of warfare. McClellan does an excellent job of turning the Eastern Army, called the Army of the Potomac, into a real live army, one that was respectable, and certainly the best trained one on the American continents, at least at that time. His opponent on the other side of the river, from the other side of the Potomac, Joe Johnston, did much the same thing. He, because of the southern supply problems, in many ways, the Confederate soldiers will not be quite as well trained as the Union soldiers, but they are going to fight very well, and they are going to be led by some pretty good generals. So Joseph Johnson is down. He's near Bull Run, and then he kind of moves closer to Richmond. There's nothing particularly tactical about that. It was just simply where you get supplies at, or the supplies the easiest. Out in the west, uh, fellow by the name of Grant, you may have heard of him, General U.S. Grant, begins to organize troops and does a fine job of it. Grant is the complete officer. There's literally nothing he cannot do in terms of troops and in terms of training. And he's going to be a good strategic commander. Whether or not he is a good on the battlefield commander, mm, he's probably as good as 90% of the troops were. And I don't know that he's known for his tactical brilliance on the battlefield, but his strategic brilliance was first rate. He really, 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 really understood the bigger picture and how to get, what you wanted to accomplish, and could come up with plans or accepted plans which would accomplish that. So Grant is maybe not 100% without a flaw, but because again, his battlefield command, he's not really tested that much in the open battlefield. His battlefield command was sensible. Was it as brilliant as we're soon to see Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson? Probably not, but not very far behind them. On the other side of the river, down on the other side of the Ohio, in this case, you have a number of Southern generals, including Beauregard, active. The Albert Sidney Johnston now takes over and takes control of the area of Kentucky and Tennessee. He's not going to be able to do much to save Kentucky. It's just too close to the north, and the north, particularly under Grant, will very quickly brush aside two forts that are set up there, Fort Henry and Fort Donelson. Having said all that, is again, despite the fact that you have the battles around Fort Henry and Fort Donelson, which are at the top of the Nashville and Tennessee rivers, despite all that, it's not really a period of intense military activity or military maneuvers. It is a period of intense training, and certainly people are getting to know one another. One of the problems in that the Confederates are going to have under this time is that there's really, particularly in the West, there's really no one in charge, or no one with complete overall authority. And in part, that's because Jefferson Davis simply scattered his commanders about, perhaps unwisely. But and in part, you're talking about a large area, and you're trying to cover a bunch of points. It could be argued that, again, like Washington, the Confederates would have been better off pulling back from one point to another and keeping their army together and not spreading it out. I wasn't there. I don't know what the best answer is for this. But I do know that come spring, you're going to see a lot of movement. And in particular, you're going to see Grant pushing through both Kentucky and Tennessee, right up to the border of Mississippi, deep inside the Western Theater. And it would look like there's not much in front of him. And there's going to be a lesson learned about that. On the other side of the campaign, of the war, over in the Eastern Theater, McClellan has been looking at a map, and he says, there are an awful lot of rivers I have to cross to get to Richmond. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the Northern Army, we'll go down, use the Navy, go down the Chesapeake Bay and up the James River, and land troops, and skipping all those rivers, just march on Richmond. Wonderful idea. And it's going to work out so well. He's going to get close enough to Richmond that he can hear the church bells of Richmond singing, but then some other things are going to happen. In the Shindo Valley, which I pointed out to you in the lecture in the theaters of the war, there's a small army, about 4,000 soldiers, under Stonewall Jackson. And Stonewall realized, of course, that if he moves north in the Shenandoah Valley, the North has to take care of him, has to be certain where he's going, because there's a straight shot from the Shenandoah Valley to the railroad connections up near Harrisburg, telegraph and railroad connections. And of course, if we capture Harrisburg, the impact on your reputation, on the North's reputation, would have been pretty high. So Stonewall, fighting for the South, realizes that, hey, I can go north and cause lots of trouble. Lincoln is 100%, we might say 200%, aware of what could happen. And so the end result, therefore, is that instead of giving McClellan all the troops he wants, Lincoln is going to send about 50,000 troops, not down the Chesapeake and up the James River, but straight down over those rivers, which I've been telling you about in Virginia, so that they act as a blocking force between Richmond and Washington, so that no Southern army can suddenly march north and seize Washington now that McClellan has taken the main Union army way south. And that sets the table for what's going to happen. And the South and the North are about to have a very eye-opening experience. Okay, take care, and we'll talk to you later. Take it. Everybody stay healthy out there.